This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome everyone to our January Lunch and Learn. Today our topic is Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion 101, how to build diversity, equity, and inclusion work into your business or organization. We have two speakers here today, Matt and Maskana. I'll give a brief bio on each of them. Matt is an experienced justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion facilitator from the Twin Cities, Minnesota. He has worked on constructive, dynamic culture work, change work in government, nonprofit, and community settings for the past 16 years. He holds a social justice degree in critical cultural studies and conflict studies from Hamline University in St. Paul. He is adept at helping people find insights into their own lives that can help them connect in a positive way across differences. Thank you, Matt, for joining us. We also have Maskana, a youth worker, historian, artist, and seasoned advocate for social change. Across 15 years of experience, she has organized and coordinated programming, developed curriculum, and facilitated workshops for diverse communities in both Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Washington, D.C. She holds a youth development degree from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. Through this, she has refined multicultural teaching and mentorship skills with all age groups and seeks to make room for the power, brilliance, and energy within her communities and beyond. She led DEI workshops at her former nonprofit in DC, LAYC, and led a 6-month DEI roadmap journey with the Johns Hopkins Center for Communication Programs. Thank you for joining us. I will turn it over to you both.
All right. So I guess we can get started. The big question in the room today is, what is DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion? And many of us have probably had some introductions to this work over the years, but I'm going to let Maskana go ahead and just facilitate a small introduction to today's offering.
Yes, thank you, Matt, and thank you all for joining us. So for today, we wanted to kind of feel more like a call and response, and so we want to be able to like hear all of your voices if it's possible to do so. So when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, today we're mostly going to be focusing on equity, but when you hear the word diversity, what's the first thing that comes to people's minds? And if you're comfortable, you can, yeah, take yourself off mute.
Different age groups.
Okay, different age groups. Okay. Anyone else?
Different cultural backgrounds.
Different cultural backgrounds. Yes, this is, a very key word, especially when we look at businesses or college universities. They really like to say we're diverse, but there's a lot of, different areas to look at that. Anyone else?
Different income levels.
Different income levels, yeah. So definitely. So when we look at diversity, it can mean a lot of different things. It could, like we mentioned before, race, class, sex, socioeconomic status. And so in the context of when we look at racial diversity, we do that with the census. Even when we ask someone's race, we kind of even take it a step further and say, well, what's your ethnicity? Where was your mom from? Where was your dad from? And we kind of look at that to see patterns, to see changes, even within our own, city or states. So when we look at the word equity, what comes to mind for people?
Fair.
Being fair, okay.
Fairness, yeah.
Anyone else?
I would say like equity of opportunity, definitely. Like, do people have the same kind of opportunities as other groups of people, depending on diversity and things like that?
Yeah, I'm sorry, this is Kelsey. I can't get my camera to work, but I would echo on that too, that people have the opportunities and the support they need for them personally. Like women being able to have access to economic security by having a maternity leave or other aids that they might need for experiences that only women experience.
Absolutely. And with disability and access needs and stuff like that too, there are dynamics of equity for people in all kind of different bodies and lives and situations. So it's really
Absolutely.
important and you know, multi-layered conversation.
And then with the last one, inclusion. So, what's the first things that come to people's mind when we hear the word inclusion?
Everybody's welcome.
Yeah.
The opportunities are the same for everybody to participate regardless of their background or education or where they're living.
Exactly. Um, so just for the sake of time, when we look at the words diversity, equity, and inclusion, is there any examples that you can find in your own life where this has applied? And so I'll share an example for me. Well, maybe some of you guys can think about an example, but especially when I look at the word equity, I remember when I was a student at the U of M, and it was really hard for me to find a scholarship. And I applied to I think like over a dozen, and I just wasn't getting anything. So once I finally went to campus, I was like, why is it so hard for me to find a scholarship? And so usually when you apply to scholarships, they'll ask you, about your parents' backgrounds and their income, and especially they look at the education of your parents. And so my dad has a PhD, he taught at the university, and they're like, that's what's holding you back. So they're like, we're kind of giving more scholarships to students where their parents didn't even finish high school or they're coming from a single parent home. And so that's when I kind of learned the difference between what is equity versus equality and how that kind of applied to my own life. So when we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, is there ideas or examples in your own life where some one of these have applied to you?
This is Kelsey again. I mean, I hinted at my personal example too, but I've been challenged to, you know, be heard and supported after becoming a mother.
Mm,
And that was especially true for me during COVID and not being trusted with teleworking and not being believed that I didn't have childcare and those different options as well, and being challenged if I was being truthful and why didn't I have other supports. And yeah, that was the experience I have, and as a woman and a mother, continue to have some of those obstacles.
thank you for sharing that. That's a huge equity example. Yeah, thank you for that story.
Thank you, Matthew.
All right, shall we move on? So what we have here next is what we've lined up as the top 3 diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. And in order to really meet the needs of the communities that we're serving, and however we're doing that, whether it's county work or a for-profit business or a school or whatever it might be for you. What we've lined up as the top 3 things are cultural competency, workplace culture, and employee and customer feedback. And Mascana, would you like to go into those a little bit?
Yeah, we can go to the next one. So the first one that we're going to talk about is cultural competency. So I'll just quickly read the definition. Cultural competence is defined as a set of values, behaviors, attitudes, and practices within a system, organization, program, or among individuals, and which enables them to work effectively cross-culturally. So I think sometimes when we think of culture, we kind of tie it back to race or ethnicity. But I think in this context, it could be very broad where we kind of look more closely at the workplace. So suggestions around cultural competency is maybe looking at your mission statement. Sometimes I know in past organizations that I've worked with, they haven't touched the mission statement in like 20 years. And
Mhm.
so, it's like, let's, take a deep dive of that and let's kind of revamp how are we really putting this into practice. Another suggestion is having DEI mandatory trainings, like especially for those who are onboarding into the departments or programs or businesses that you are all a part of. Um, and then kind of bringing it back to like the racial, like cultural background of it is I know in a lot of my past nonprofits, we did a lot of things around Heritage Month activities. So, like September, October is like Hispanic, Latinx Heritage Month, February is Black History Month, March is Women's History Month. So, kind of it's like, what are we doing for that? What activities are we bringing to the workplace or events that we can put on for the community? And then I think a big thing is not making someone the spokesperson slash assumption. So kind of even bringing it back to Kelsey, like not just assuming since she's a woman and she's a mother that she has a babysitter on standby, or when we're talking about the cultural impact, I know I felt it a lot, especially in Minnesota. If I was the only Black student, that it's like, oh, you're like the Black spokesperson now, not putting that pressure on someone to be the spokesperson. Um, so I want to just kind of leave this slide up a little bit and see. I'm just kind of curious to see if any of your programs have incorporated this in the past few years that I know DEI kind of has taken more of a lead in workplaces, or how you maybe want to incorporate this into your own life.
It's Kelsey again. Just keep us rolling, keep some conversation happening. I'm in marketing and communications, so when there is a cultural month or like something like that, I do try to highlight businesses that are owned, because we're in economic development, businesses that are owned by people of that population. It can be challenging because I can find myself going to the same people over and over again, and I don't want to do that, but there are those who are willing to say, yes, I'm Latino, and I'm happy to share that that's part of my identity with the business, where sometimes I'll have a business owner that's like, I just want to be acknowledged for my business, not for who I am owning it. So you can't see my camera, but as a white woman, that's one of the challenges that I have in trying to acknowledge some of those cultural months.
Well, and really what you're trying to do, it sounds like, is build community too and make connections between the county and the businesses. And I think that, you know, that's really important. So I hope you keep up that work. Thank you for
Work,
doing that.
yeah, working on it.
Yeah.
And I think it's also like it could be even like a newsletter where you're sharing those businesses like that people can still shop at online too. It doesn't always have, it could still be like that sense of community, but maybe it's just not in that county.
Yep, and I'll do too, like, take a business that is owned by somebody of, or carries carries, just because October was Hispanic Heritage Month, take a store that carries some um, products that are made or developed by a Latino or someone of the Latinx community. So
Yeah.
trying to think outside the box too, and then also give those individuals and that community the opportunity to share. Like, I don't need to share for you. You tell me what I can share for you.
Absolutely. All right, the next one is workplace culture. So we've put a few ideas on this slide about different ways to really pull for equity, especially when it comes to your workplace culture. But I'll go ahead with some of these ideas. We've talked to some folks about floating holidays because not everybody celebrates the same holidays. And also, Ms. Gano was talking about this a little bit earlier, but pay equity. How do we know that people are being equitably paid, and is it possible to even list salaries? And especially when you're advertising job postings, do people know how much they'll be paid at a certain position? That sort of thing. Ms. Gana, can you talk about the mental health day?
Yeah, so an organization that I worked with last year, they incorporated Mental Health Day. So it was the last Friday of each month where it was a paid day for those people to just take a self-care day. So I don't know if you could incorporate that depending on your department or your program, but I think it really boosts like morale in the organization. And then that just kind of goes along with like appreciation days, like um, and it can be, even tied around something like around Halloween or Valentine's Day or something like that, but just kind of more like appreciation instead of maybe just doing it once a year. And then I'll pass it back to Matt to talk a little bit more on service towards other versus servitude.
So we thought this was important to put in because, sometimes depending on the different pay levels and hierarchies and however your workplace culture is currently organized, sometimes sometimes these two things can get confused. So I wanted to talk about service towards others. So really doing your work with an open heart and being a lot of us are public servants. We're doing work for the common good. And, that should never feel like servitude. It should never feel like you don't have choice and agency and that sort of thing within your position. And I think that when we really look at relationships with culture and power and things like that, it's just important to be able to have dialogue around those sorts of things when it comes to really developing the kinds of workplace cultures that we all truly want to work in. And if we are working for the common good, then that should be, hopefully a starting point, to some of those dialogues. So, anybody have any thoughts about workplace culture? Any of these things already working for you, or thoughts about how you could implement some DEI work into where you work to get closer to some of these goals about equity and inclusion and really capitalizing on the skills of a diverse workforce, and all those aspects of diversity. So, yeah, thanks everybody.
Well, I'm Dean Erdahl. I'm the state representative, and I kind of come from DEI Central in the legislature, where a lot of the things that you're talking about, we deal with, and I think it's very important as our state has changed to have, diversity and equity and inclusion. But the other side that I hear, and I guess I'm looking for your response, is that this DEI can lead to division among our population, and that it basically pits the oppressed against the oppressor. Uh, what comments would you have on that?
I think when you were talking about oppressed and oppressors and kind of pitting people against each other, if there are remarkable differences in people's lives and the ways that they work and those sorts of things, I think that in terms of a workplace culture, it just needs to be based on mutual respect. And I mean, people have a lot of different communication styles and different styles for how they deal with conflict. I think if a conflict comes up, it was probably already there. But that's why Maskana and I talk so much about the importance of dialogue, because we might have really different experiences and we might have different opinions as well. But if we can really understand where each person is coming from and try to work through some of that conflict, then, I think that a lot of positive changes can happen by, admitting that we have different experiences and opinions, and really working to center what a roadmap forward might look like, if everyone's able to really come to the table, and I think that's the ultimate goal for me.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think understanding is important, and I just have a major concern that we don't divide people. And again, understanding I think is a key to not doing that.
Yeah.
And I think it's also just kind of about like embracing it too. Like it doesn't have to be, good versus bad. It could just be different. So like even for example, actually me and Matt were just talking about Matt celebrating Christmas a little bit later with his family on January 7th. And I was like, actually, that's our Christmas because in my culture, I'm Eritrean and most of us are Orthodox, so they follow the Orthodox calendar. And I was like, that's our Christmas. It's January 7th. And so, it's like just making those connections. Like it's on a different day, but, it's the same holiday.
Then I was able to tell my mom, I'm like, yeah, we're still celebrating on Christmas. She's like, what do you mean? I'm like, it's Eritrean Orthodox Christmas. So, it's just kind of special to be able to make some of those connections. And I think it just makes our lives richer for, actually knowing each other enough to build really deep and strong relationships.
Yeah.
And relationships are at the core of all of this work. So.
And I think it's okay we can agree to disagree as long as we're doing it, respectfully.
Yep.
Because I think another thing too is a lot of times when we do this work, people think of it as a checklist of like, oh, I'm gonna get a, certificate of completion, but this is lifelong work. So it's not just gonna go away. Like I think we've seen that oftentimes in this country.
Yeah.
But yeah, and we're also still learning too. We're always learning. Um, so the next slide is employee customers feedback. So some suggestions that we've actually done a little bit with Grenville County is doing anonymous surveys. So kind of feeling out what people's thoughts and feelings are about certain issues that it might go in leading into the trainings that we're going to do, having focus groups, um, having DEI trainings, equity roadmaps which we shared, um, having guest speakers, and then like I think later down the line incorporating retreats for like leadership teams and accountability partners. Um, and I would just say again with like the focus groups, I led a lot of equity trainings at my previous nonprofit LAYC in DC, and so it's about there was around 200 employees, and so it's kind of broken down into like senior leadership and directors and managers and specialists and things like that. So I think sometimes it's important to bring people together, but it's also important to let those people kind of talk amongst themselves so it doesn't feel like they're afraid to say something and there's going to be retaliation later. So I think it's just always allowing to have that like safe space in those sessions. And then I don't know, Matt, if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, I think, I love this image to the left over here, and it reminds me of the artwork from Shel Silverstein's book of poetry. But this is the justice, equity, and equality version of it, and I think it just really illustrates so well what it means to work together for a common good. And you can see that justice and equity both allow both of these individuals to get as many of the apples as they need to. So I think justice is an important aspect of this work too, and that comes in a lot with different kind of the legal side of different things, but we all do have, the right to be ourselves and hopefully have a brilliant and remarkable life, and so I just want to say that out loud because it does matter, so thank you all for going through this with us today and for joining us. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts or comments about these last couple sections.
You want to go to the next slide?
Yep.
This is Kelsey. I know there's not too many of us here, but Dean, I just want to thank you for being here today. I think it's important to have leaders in these conversations, and I think it's important that those DEI trainings and those things become mandatory, especially within our governments. I used to work for a state entity where those were required. It didn't necessarily stop things from happening, but it gave a tool for the discussion. And when there's not those trainings, there's not a place to have these discussions, and there's not that support for employees to fall back on. And so I just appreciate you guys sharing those ideas and ask leaders to continue to use their privilege to put those things in the forefront and make them important. So even the leaders are leading by example, showing they're taking the trainings and doing the learning too. So thank you both for all you shared today.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Kelsey.
Great comments, Kelsey. Thank you for sharing those.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to chime in as well. I appreciate you both saying that. I mean, even as trainers, you're still learning. And I appreciate that side story of just the late celebrating Christmas and, oh, that is actually another Christmas. I think that's just the idea of we're always learning, and we can learn through dialogue, discussion, and then come to a better understanding. And at the core of this is all based on relationships. And yeah, that's the core of so many people's work. This actually isn't as divisive or as polarized as people make it to be. And I think through further discussion and understanding that becomes clear. So appreciate you both. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew.
And I just also wanted to chime in too with this slide, resources, kind of tying it back to cultural competency. PBS is a great resource. It's, free. I mean, you can donate it if you want to, but it's like they have great articles and podcasts and documentaries that are kind of centered around these conversations. And so even like for my nonprofit in DC, I used to do these, it was called Melanin Movie Monday. So we watched like Black films and had a discussion, and it was a mixed group of people from all walks of life. And, it's just watching something and having a conversation. You don't have to be an expert, in it. And then we just also wanted to do, our elevator pitch. If this is of interest to you, we do lead trainings. We got to lead one a couple of weeks ago with the leadership team of Renville County. I wish I was there in person because we had a lot of technical difficulties, but we still got through it. And so me and Matt are welcome to, even if you have more questions or if you want more resources or anything like that, please feel free to email us.
Yeah, please reach out to us. We've got our emails on this slide here, and we'll make sure that our slideshow as well as this recording are available on the website. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions before we wrap it up? Our January Lunch and Learn? Going once? Going twice? Thank you, everyone, for your time. And that should be available on the website late this afternoon or tomorrow morning. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.